So, hello everyone. We are now down to the art history timeline of the Egyptian period. As you can see in this slide, this is the timeline of the Egyptian art. So, we have pre-dynastic period, early dynastic period, until the later part or the late period of ancient Egypt. Later on, we will discuss it one by one. But for now, let us talk about first the ancient Egyptian art, which includes the painting, sculpture, architecture, and other arts produced by the civilization in the Lower Nile Valley from 5000 BCE to 300 CE. We all know that art has a variety of forms. Dance is also an art, but the main or the common arts are the painting, sculpture, and architecture. Speaking of the Lower Nile Valley or the Nile River Valley, so are we familiar with this river? So of course, the Nile River played an important role in shaping the lives and society of ancient Egypt. The Nile provided the ancient Egyptians with food, transportation, building materials, and more. Historically, this Nile River is the longest river in the world. It is over 4,100 miles long. The Nile is located in the northeast Africa on the flows and it flows through many different African countries including Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Burundi. So this is why the ancient Egypt was able to flourish because of its location on the Nile River, which floods at predictable intervals, allowing controlled irrigation and providing nutrient-rich soil favorable to agriculture. So every time nga naay floods, di ba, ma-erode man ang iyahang mga soil, and this soil kay mo ni siya kanang one of the elements or kanang kasangkapan sa paghimo og mga artworks during that era. So basically, the natural resources in the Nile Valley during the rise of ancient Egypt includes building and decorative stone, copper and lead ores, gold and semi-precious stones, all of which contributed to the architecture, monuments, jewels, and other art forms for which this civilization would become well known. And since taas man jud kay nga valley, and then it produced a high quality or abundance of the materials. Therefore, ang mga product nila is high quality building stones pod during that era. So now, let us proceed to the main timeline of the ancient Egypt art. So we have the pre-dynastic period, early dynastic period art, the Old Kingdom art, art in the first intermediate period, the Middle Kingdom art, second intermediate period or the New Kingdom art, and the later periods and legacy. So first up, we have the pre-dynastic period in Egypt. So I believe that art is an essential aspect of any civilization. Civilization also known as the urbanization or the civilized city. So art plays an important role in civilizing a particular place. So for example, in our place, Karkar City, we are already 12 or 13, I guess, chartered city. So one of our contributors in civilizing our place is our heritages here in Karkar. So we are known as the heritage city of the south. So just like sa Egyptian, this ang ilang mga art kay essential kayo sa pag-civilize sa ilahang place. Since once the basic human needs have been taken care of, such as food, shelter, some form of community law, and the religious belief cultures begin producing artwork. And often all of this development occur more or less simultaneously. And this process began in the pre-dynastic period in Egypt circa 6000 to circa 3150 BCE through images of animals, human beings, and supernatural figures inscribed on rock walls. So pre pa man siya, so before pa. So basically ang ilang mga artworks kaayo kay mga basic pa or mga fundamentals pa nga gipang-produce. Like sa atoa sa during sa atong mga ancestors, di ba? Kasagaran silang mga artwork is makita man sa mga bato, sa mga walls nga ilang gipang-carve during that period. Kay as years goes by, magka-develop man ang mga forms or mga materials nga gamiton sa sa pag-paint or pag-produce og artworks. So, the pre-dynastic period is traditionally equivalent to the Neolithic period beginning circa 6000 BCE and including to the proto-dynastic period or Dinakada III. Next, generally divided into cultural periods, each named after the place where a certain type of Egyptian settlement was first discovered. Egyptian society was based on the concept of harmony known as Ma'at. Ma'at is the ancient Egyptian goddess of truth, justice, harmony, and balance. She is depicted in anthropomorphic form as a winged woman, often in profile with an ostrich feather on her head or simply as a white ostrich feather. Ma'at had come into being at the dawn of creation and sustained the universe. So like sa atuang ancestors, they also believe in gods and goddesses. During sa atong pre-colonization, our ancestors believe in different aspects or different gods and goddesses in different aspects. Like naay sila gods sa agriculture, like every time nga mag-ani sila sa ilahang mga gipagtanom, na sila i-praise ana nga particular through rituals. And another kung naasad sila na gusto nga couple nga magka-anak, naasad sila i-praise nga particular nga God. And also parehas sa death, naasad sila kanang i-praise ana nga ang katong namatay is mubalik pagikan sa sulad. So, mo na siya mga belief about sa gods and goddesses. And all Egyptian art is based on the perfect balance because it reflects the ideal world of the gods. The same way, these gods provided all good gifts for humanity, so the artwork was imagined and created to provide a use. And also, Egyptian art was always first and foremost functional. No matter how beautifully a statue may have been crafted, its purpose was to serve as a home for a spirit or a god. Kasagaran sa mga artworks sa pre-dynastic kay mga tomb paintings, temple tableaus, home and palace gardens all were created. Pareha sa nasa image, so kay mostly ang ilang mga topics sa ilang mga art man good kay more on the ideal world of the gods, mga afterlife. So therefore, ang ilang mga artwork nga gipang-produce is more on tomb paintings. But during sa pre-dynastic period, naka-inscribe pa siya sa mga wall or stone. But later on, naka-develop na siya into physical na jud nga mga artworks. And that happened during sa early dynastic period of art. So, the hallmarks of ancient Egyptian civilization such as art, architecture, and religion took shape during the early dynastic period. Not only architecture but nanapoy na produce nga mga sculpture, paintings, and so on and so forth. So, first, we have the art in the early dynastic period. Many of the common aesthetic practices of Egyptian art and architecture were formalized during this era. So it was during this era as Egyptian society grew and advanced rapidly toward refined civilization. Much of Egyptian art revolved around the theme of permanence, from large architectural structures to writing and imagery of the afterlife. Most of the artists endeavored to preserve everything from the present as clearly and permanently as possible. Then, a new and distinctive pottery appeared during this time, along with the use of copper, Mesopotamian process of dried bricks, and architectural building principles such as the arc and the decorative resist walls. Ceramic objects during this era were commonly interred with the dead in tombs. Mundane objects such as plates ensure the continuation of activities practiced in the physical world, while other vessels stored the internal organs of the body after it was embalmed. So as you can see sa image, that is the ceramic plate circa 3900 BCE ago. So this is a plate from the early dynastic period of ancient Egypt. It depicts a man on a boat alongside a hippopotamus and crocodile. In this context, the hippopotamus probably symbolizes chaos and destruction in the form of the god Set, while the crocodile could symbolize the god Subic, who occasionally served as a protective deity. Next, it was also during this period that the Egyptian writing was further developed. Initially composed of a few symbols by the end of the Third Dynasty, and it had been expanded to include more than 200 symbols, both phonograms and ideograms. So, unsa man itong writing system sa ancient Egypt. So, the writing system of the ancient Egypt known as the hieroglyphs, or the sacred words. The hieroglyphs were written on papyrus, carved in stone on tomb and temple walls, and used to decorate many objects to cultic and daily life use. Next, symbolism is omnipresent in Egyptian art. So, symbolism played an important role in establishing a sense of order. Symbols range from the pharaoh's regalia, signifying his power to maintain order, to the individual symbols of Egyptian gods and goddesses, to animals depicted as highly symbolic figures. So, unsa man din ning mga pharaohs or kinsa man ning mga pharaohs? So, pharaohs during the Egypt were the king or queen. Most pharaohs were men, but some well-known pharaohs such as Nefertiti and Cleopatra were women. A pharaoh was the most important and powerful person in the kingdom. He was the head of the government and high priest of every temple. So as you can see sa image, that is sunken relief of the crocodile god Sobek. It served a variety of purposes including fertility, military powers, and protection. And that is the purpose of the symbolism in Egyptian period. Next, colors were more expressive rather than natural. So, mas expressive na ang colors during sa early dynastic period unlike sa pre-dynastic period in which ang ilang mga color ato is more likely black and white, which signifies the naturality of the environment. For instance, red skin painted on characters implied vigorous stand. Yellow skin was used for women or middle-aged men who work indoors. Then blue or gold indicated divinity because of its unnatural appearance and association with previous materials. And the use of black for royal figures expressed the fertility of the Nile from which Egypt was born. Then, art forms were characterized by regularity and detailed depiction of gods, human beings, heroic battles, and nature, and were intended to provide solace to the deceased in the afterlife. The media ranged from papyrus drawings to pictograph or hieroglyphics, and including funerary sculpture carved in relief and in the round from sandstone, quartz, diorite, and granite. So this is the development from the pre-dynastic to early dynastic period. And that is for the art. Next, we have the architecture of the early dynastic. So, the hallmarks of ancient Egyptian architecture took shape during the early dynastic period. We have first and second dynasties. So, Egyptian houses were made of mud collected from the Nile River. The mud was placed in molds and left to dry in the hot sun to harden. Many Egyptian towns situated near the cultivated area of the Nile Valley have disappeared, either by flooding as the riverbed slowly rose during the millennia, or the mud bricks of which they were built were used by the peasants as fertilizer. But fortunately, the dry, hot climate of Egypt preserved some mud brick structures. Next, large tombs of pharaohs at Abydos and Akkada, in addition to cemeteries at Saqqara and Helwan near Memphis, reveal structures built largely of wood and mud bricks, with some use of stone and floors. So the stone was used in quantity for the manufacture of ornaments, vessels, and occasionally for statues. Then we have tamarix. So tamarix was used to build boats such as the Abydos boats. So ang tawag sa materials nga i-build for boats is the tamarix. One of the most important indigenous woodworking techniques was the fixed mortise and tenon joint, where said tenon was made by shaping the end of one timber to fit into a mortise or hole that is to cut into a second timber. Then a variation of this joint using a fret tenon eventually became one of the most important features in Mediterranean and Egyptian shipbuilding. Then, ancient Egyptian temples were aligned with astronomically significant events like solstices and equinoxes. So as you can see sa image, that is the step pyramid at Saqqara, the large tombs of pharaohs at Abydos and Akkada, in addition to cemeteries and Saqqara and Helwan. The structures built largely of wood and mud bricks with some small use of stone for walls and floors. Next is the painting during the early dynastic period. So the early dynastic period of ancient Egypt reached a high level in painting and sculpture that was both highly stylized and symbolic. So all Egyptian reliefs were painted, and less prestigious works in tombs, temples, and palaces were just painted on a flat surface. So the stone surfaces were prepared by whitewash, or, if rough, a layer of coarse mud plaster, with a smoother gesso layer above. Some finer limestone could take paint directly. Then pigments were mostly mineral, chosen to withstand strong sunlight without fading. While after painting, a varnish or resin was usually applied as a protective coating, and many paintings with some exposure to the elements have survived remarkably well, although those on fully exposed walls rarely have. So unsa may gamit sa varnish or resin sa atoang painting or artwork? So usually ang varnish mo na siya murag pang finishing, mo na siya ang protection against sa other elements nga ma-expose sa atoang artwork. So next, many ancient Egyptian paintings have survived due to Egypt's extremely dry climate. The paintings were often made with the intent of making a pleasant afterlife for the deceased. The themes included journey through the afterworld or protective deities, introducing the deceased to the gods of the underworld. Some tomb paintings show activities that the deceased were involved in when they were alive and wished to carry on doing for eternity. The Egyptian paintings are painted in such a way to show a profile view and a side view of the animal or person, a technique known as composite view, and their main colors were red, blue, black, gold, and green. So as you can see sa image, that is wall painting of Nefertari. The Egyptian paintings are painted in such a way to show a profile view and a side view of the animal or person. So this painting For example, shows the head from a profile view and the body from a frontal view. The main colors used were red, blue, black, gold, and green. Next is the sculpture of the early dynastic period. The small-scale sculptures of the early dynastic period in ancient Egypt provide insight to the foundations of Egyptian customs and the unification of the country. The monumental sculpture of ancient Egypt is world famous, but refined and delicate small works exist in much greater numbers. So the Egyptians used the distinctive technique of sunken relief, which is well suited to very bright sunlight. The main figures in reliefs adhere to the same figure convention as in painting, with parted legs and head shown from the side, but the torso from the front and a standard set of proportion making up the figure. Next, early tombs contain small sculptural models of the slaves, animals, buildings, and objects such as boats necessary for the deceased to continue his lifestyle in the afterlife, and later Ushbati figures. However, the great majority of wooden sculpture has been lost to decay or probably used as fuel, but the small figures of deities or their animal personifications are commonly found in popular materials such as pottery. There were also large numbers of small carved objects, from figures of the gods to toys and carved utensils. Then, the El Amrak clay model of cattle circa 3500 BCE predates the early dynastic period but provides an idea of the appearance and production method of tomb sculptures of the time. So this El Amrak clay model is an example of tomb sculpture. Cattle more commonly represented a source of blood rather than meat or dairy products, but likely symbolize a source of food in the afterlife. So sa kana nga image, mao na siya ang El Amra clay model of cattle. The model was found in a tomb and was likely intended as a symbolic source of sustenance in the afterlife. Next is the palette of Narmer. So as you can see in the picture, on each side of the palette, the first king of a unified Egypt is depicted as an active conqueror and as a victorious son of divinity. As for your information, Narmer was the ancient Egyptian pharaoh during the early dynastic period. And as in the art of many cultures of ancient times, the palette contains hieratic scale in which Narmer is the largest figure. Narmer's headgear symbolizes the historic unification of the two kingdoms. And that is the early dynastic period of ancient Egyptian art. Next up, we have Old Kingdom. Old Kingdom, known as the Age of the Pyramids. The Old Kingdom was characterized by revolutionary advancements in architecture. The Old Kingdom is the name given to the period in the 3rd millennium BCE. Then, the obelisk, first developed in the early dynastic period, was refined and more widely used during the Old Kingdom. Tomb paintings became increasingly sophisticated, but statuary remained static for the most part. Also, art during the Old Kingdom was state-mandated, which means the king or a high-ranking nobility commissioned a piece and also dictated its style. This is why there is such uniformity in Old Kingdom artwork. Different artists may have had their own vision, but they had to create in accordance with their clients' wishes. And this paradigm changed when the Old Kingdom collapsed and initiated the first intermediate period, 2181 to 2040 BCE. And that is the Old Kingdom period.
Hello everyone, I am Faye Baoya and today I'm going to tackle about the art in the first intermediate period. So, the first intermediate period has long been characterized as a time of chaos and darkness, and artwork from this era has been used to substantiate such claims. The argument from art rests on an interpretation of first intermediate period works as poor quality as well as an absence of monumental building projects to prove that Egyptian culture was in a kind of free fall toward anarchy and dissolution. But in reality, the first intermediate period of Egypt was a time of tremendous growth and cultural change. So the quality of the artwork resulted from a lack of a strong central government and the corresponding absence of state-mandated art. So the different districts were now free to develop their own vision in the arts and create according to that vision. So there is nothing low quality about first intermediate period art. It is simply different from Old Kingdom artwork. So the lack of monumental building projects during this time is also easily explained. The dynasties of the Old Kingdom had drained the government treasury in creating their own grand monuments, and by the time of the 5th dynasty, there were no resources left for such projects. So the collapse of the Old Kingdom following the 6th dynasty certainly was a time of confusion, but there is no evidence to suggest the era which followed was any kind of dark age. So the first intermediate period produced a number of pieces, but also saw the rise of mass-produced artwork. Items which had previously been made by a single artist were now assembled and painted by a production crew. Amulets, coffins, ceramics, and shabti dolls were among these crafts. So, shabti dolls were important funerary objects which were buried with the deceased and were thought to come to life in the next world and tend to one's responsibilities. So these were made of faience, stone, or wood, but in the first intermediate period are mostly of wood and mass-produced to be sold cheaply. So the next is Middle Kingdom. So the Middle Kingdom of Egypt is a period in the history of ancient Egypt stretching from the establishment of the 11th dynasty to the end of the 30th dynasty between 2055 and 1650 BCE. So the first intermediate period ended when Mentuhotep II of Thebes defeated the kings of Heracleopolis and initiated the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. So Thebes now became the capital of Egypt, and a strong central government again had the power to dictate artistic taste and creation. So the rulers of the Middle Kingdom, however, encouraged the different styles of the districts and did not mandate that all art conform to the taste of the nobility. Although there was great reverence for Old Kingdom art and in many cases an obvious attempt to reflect it, Middle Kingdom art is distinctive in the themes of explored and the sophistication of the technique. So next, during this period, the funerary cult of Osiris arose to dominate Egyptian popular religion, so usually regarded as the high point of Egyptian culture. So the tomb of Mentuhotep II is itself a work of art sculpted from the cliffs near Thebes, which merges seamlessly with the natural landscape to create the effect of a wholly organic work. So the paintings, frescoes, and statuary which accompanied the tomb also reflect a high level of sophistication and, as always, symmetry. So jewelry was also refined greatly at this time, with some of the finest pieces in Egyptian history dated to this era. So a pendant from the reign of Senusret II, which he gave to his daughter is fashioned of thin gold wires attached to a solid gold backing inlaid with 372 semi-precious stones. So the statues and busts of kings and queens are intricately curved with a precision and beauty lacking in much of the Old Kingdom art. So, the subject matter, the most striking aspect of Middle Kingdom art. Common people, instead of nobility, feature more often in art from this period than any other. So the influence of the first intermediate period continues to be seen in all the art from the Middle Kingdom, where laborers, farmers, dancers, singers, and domestic life receive almost as much attention as kings, nobles, and the gods. So artwork in tombs continued to reflect the traditional view of the afterlife, but literature from the time questioned the old belief and suggested that one should concentrate on the only life one could be sure of, the present. So Middle Kingdom art adheres to this principle while at the same time hinting more at the subject's emotional state than in earlier eras. However, the afterlife was viewed at this time. The emphasis in art always gravitates to the here and now. Images of the afterlife include people enjoying the simple pleasures of life on earth like eating, drinking, and sowing and harvesting a field. So the detail of these scenes emphasizes the pleasures of life on earth, which one should make the most of. Dog colors during this time also become more sophisticated, which suggests more leisure time for hunting and greater attention to the ornamentation of simple daily objects. So next, we have the second intermediate period or the New Kingdom art. So the art of the second intermediate period of Egypt continued the traditions of the Middle Kingdom, but often less effectively. The best artists were available to the nobility at Thebes and produced high-quality work, but non-royal artists were less skilled. So this era, like the first, is also often characterized as disorganized and chaotic, and the artwork helped as proof, but there were many fine works created during this time. They were simply on a smaller scale. So next, the New Kingdom is the most famous era of Egyptian history with the best-known rulers and most recognizable artwork. The colossal statues, which were initiated in the Middle Kingdom, became more common during this time. So the Temple of Karnak, with its great hypostyle hall, was expanded regularly. The Egyptian Book of the Dead was copied with accompanying illustrations for more and more people, and funerary objects like Shabdi dolls were of higher quality. Tomb paintings, statuary, temple beliefs, pictorials, headdresses, and other jewelry of high quality continued to be produced, and the hyksos, though often vilified by later Egyptian writers, contributed to cultural development. So next, the Egypt of the New Kingdom is the Egypt of empire. As the borders of the country expanded, Egyptian artists were introduced to different styles and techniques which improved their skill. So the metalwork of the Hittites, which the Egyptians made use of in weaponry, also influenced art. So the wealth of the country was reflected in the enormity of individual artworks as well as their quality. So next is the later periods of legacy. So the late period of ancient Egypt, 664 to 332 BCE, marked a maintenance of artistic tradition with subtle changes in the representation of the human form. So the skills acquired would continue through the third intermediate period of Egypt and late period, which are also negatively compared with the grandeur eras of a strong central government. So the style of these later periods was affected by the times and the limited resources, but the art is still of considerable quality. So the late period of ancient Egypt revived all Old Kingdom art in an effort to identify themselves with Egypt's oldest traditions, while native Egyptian rulers and nobility sought to advance artistic representation from the New Kingdom. So next, the late period of ancient Egypt refers to the last flowering of native Egyptian rulers after the third intermediate period from the 26th dynasty into Persian conquest and ended with the conquest by Alexander the Great and establishment of the Ptolemaic kingdom. Ptolemaic kingdom. So next, the late period is often regarded as the last gasp of a once great culture during which the power of Egypt steadily diminished. So 26th dynasty. So the 26th dynasty, also known as the Scythe dynasty, reigned from 672 to 525 BCE. Canal construction from the Nile to the Red Sea began. So one major contribution from the late period of ancient Egypt was the Brooklyn papyrus. So this was a medical papyrus with a collection of medical and magical remedies for victims of snake bites based on snake type or symptoms. So next, artwork during this time was representative of animal cults and animal mummies. So next is the 27th dynasty. So the first Achaemenid period, or 525 to 404 BCE, marked the conquest of Egypt by the Persian Empire under Cambyses II. In May 525 BCE, Cambyses defeated Psamtik III in the Battle of Pelusium in the eastern Nile Delta. So this basalt portrayed busts of an unknown Egyptian dignitary from the period shows little change from convention in the representation of the human form. So his necklace is typical of those made in the Achaemenid period. So next, 28th through 30th dynasties. So the 28th dynasty consisted of a single king, Amarchus, Prince of Sais, who rebelled against the Persians and briefly re-established indigenous Egyptian rule. So he left no monuments with his name. So this dynasty reigned for 6 years, from 404 to 398 BCE. So the 29th dynasty ruled from Mendes from 398 to 380 BCE. So the 30th dynasty took the art style from the 26th dynasty. So a series of 3 pharaohs ruled from 380 BCE until their final defeat in 343 BCE led to the reoccupation by the Persians. So a fragment of Nectanebo the third's and the second's portrait, with its partial smile and sagging chin, in the Museum of Fine Arts in Lyon, is slightly more naturalistic than previous representations of pharaohs. So that's all, and thank you.